The cafe was almost empty when Sarah checked her phone for the 15th time. 2 hours. She'd been sitting there for 2 hours, her untouched latte now cold, her hope slowly dissolving like the foam that had long since disappeared from its surface. She should have left after the first hour. That's what her best friend would have told her, what anyone with common sense would have told her. But something kept her rooted to that corner table by the window, watching strangers pass by on the rain-slicked street, each time wondering if the next person to walk through that door would be him. Sarah Bennett wasn't naive. At 32, she'd been through enough failed relationships and disappointing dates to know better than to get her hopes up. But this time had felt different. The messages exchanged over the past 3 weeks had been thoughtful, funny, vulnerable. Marcus had shared stories about his work as a teacher, his love for old bookstores, his complicated relationship with his father. She'd opened up too, more than she usually did with strangers on dating apps. There was a connection she couldn't quite explain, a sense that maybe, just maybe, this could be something real. Now, staring at her phone screen with no new messages, she felt foolish for believing in maybes. The bell above the cafe door chimed, and Sarah looked up instinctively, though by now she'd trained herself not to expect anything. An older man entered, probably in his 60s, wearing a worn jacket and carrying an expression of unmistakable exhaustion. He scanned the cafe, his eyes landing on her for just a moment before moving on. Sarah returned her gaze to her phone, composing the text she'd been avoiding. I guess this isn't happening. Take care. Asterisk. Excuse me, are you Sarah? She looked up, surprised to find the older man standing beside her table. Up close, she could see the worry lines etched deep around his eyes, the silver stubble on his jaw, the way his hands trembled slightly as he gripped the back of the empty chair across from her. Yes, but I'm actually waiting for someone, she said gently, assuming he'd mistaken her for someone else. I know. You're waiting for Marcus. His voice cracked on the name, and Sarah felt her stomach drop. I'm Robert Chen. I'm Marcus's father. The cafe seemed to tilt slightly. Sarah set down her phone, her heart beginning to race with a sudden, inexplicable dread. Is he okay? Did something happen? Robert pulled out the chair and sat down heavily, as if his legs could no longer support him. There was an accident. This morning. Marcus was on his way to meet you, and... He paused, pressing his fingers against his eyes. A car ran a red light. He's in surgery right now. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. The cafe sounds, the hiss of the espresso machine, the murmur of conversation, the clink of cups, all faded into a distant buzz. Oh my God. Is he going to be okay? The doctors say the next few hours are critical. Robert's voice was barely above a whisper. But before they took him in, when he was still conscious, do you know what he kept saying? He looked at Sarah with eyes that held a mixture of anguish and something else, something that might have been wonder. He kept saying your name. He kept asking me to come here, to tell you what happened. He was so worried you'd think he stood you up. Even with a collapsed lung and internal bleeding, he was worried about disappointing you. Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks before she could stop them. She'd spent 2 hours feeling sorry for herself, annoyed at being stood up, when Marcus had been fighting for his life. The guilt crashed over her in waves. I'm so sorry, she managed. You should be at the hospital with him, not here. I can't believe you came. All this way just to. He made me promise. Robert's own eyes were glistening now. He said, Dad, she's special. She'll be sitting there wondering what went wrong, thinking it was her fault somehow. Please don't let her think that. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands and showed Sarah the screen, a photo of a young man with kind eyes and an easy smile. He showed me your picture. Talked about you all morning while getting ready. I haven't seen him this excited about someone in years. Not since his mother passed. Sarah stared at the photo, at this man she'd never met in person but somehow felt she knew. Can I see him? Would that be okay? Robert looked surprised, then something softened in his weathered face. You'd really want to? Of course I would. They took a cab to St. Mary's Hospital, riding in silence through streets that seemed surreal under the gray afternoon sky. Robert led her through sterile corridors to the surgical wing, where they joined a small group in the waiting room. Marcus's sister, Jennifer, and her husband, both of whom looked at Sarah with curiosity but didn't ask questions. The wait was excruciating. Sarah sat beside Robert, this man she'd met less than an hour ago, feeling the weight of his fear as if it were her own. She learned that Marcus's mother had died 3 years earlier from cancer. That Marcus had put his life on hold to care for her during those final months. That he'd only recently started dating again, hesitant and guarded, until he'd matched with Sarah. He said you were different, Robert told her quietly. He said talking to you felt like coming home. When the surgeon finally emerged, still in his scrubs, the entire waiting room seemed to hold its breath. The surgery went well. He's stable. He's going to need time to recover, but he's going to be okay. The relief was palpable. Jennifer sobbed into her husband's shoulder. Robert closed his eyes and whispered something that might have been a prayer. And Sarah, who'd been holding herself together through sheer force of will, finally let herself breathe. 2 days later, when Marcus was conscious and receiving visitors, Sarah walked into his hospital room carrying flowers and a nervous smile. He looked pale and bruised, with tubes and monitors surrounding him, but when he saw her, his face transformed. "You came," he said, his voice hoarse. "Your dad told me what you said. About not wanting me to think you stood me up." Sarah sat down beside his bed, setting the flowers on the side table. "For the record, I would have waited longer." Marcus laughed, then winced. "Please don't make me laugh. Everything hurts. Sorry." She took his hand carefully, mindful of the IV. "Your dad is an amazing person, you know. To leave the hospital when you were in surgery, just to keep a promise to you. That's just who he is. He taught me that showing up for people matters. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." Marcus squeezed her hand weakly. "I'm sorry our first meeting was so dramatic. Are you kidding? I'll never forget it." Sarah smiled through fresh tears. "Your father told me about your mom. About how you took care of her. About the kind of person you are. I hope that didn't scare you off." It did the opposite. She leaned forward, her voice gentle but certain. "I waited 2 hours for a blind date. What I got instead was a glimpse into the kind of man you really are. The kind who thinks of others even in his worst moments. The kind who comes from a father who would cross the city to keep his son's promise to a stranger. That's worth waiting for. That's worth everything." Marcus's eyes filled with tears. "So, does this count as our first date?" "Absolutely not. You owe me a proper one. Coffee, conversation. No hospital equipment. Deal." 3 months later, Sarah and Marcus returned to that same cafe, sitting at that same corner table by the window. Robert joined them, and together they raised their cups in a quiet toast, to second chances, to promises kept, to the kindness of strangers who become family, and to love that was worth the wait.